Right now, we're in such a great era for creators because we're living through the TikTokification of all social media. AKA, for a decade, you had to build a lot of followers to get anything seen. Now, your first piece of content be seen by 1 million people. That's profound. So now we're in a whole different world where if you do a podcast, the clips get posted on TikTok and YouTube Shorts and Instagram Reels, which I think is gonna start following for a bigger virality kind of gap. What I mean gap is instead of all your Reels getting somewhat the same amount of views, now you'll start seeing some things go viral, but the views you're getting are declining because they have to have those views for the virality. If in that copy, your entire Instagram Reels profile is listen to the podcast and the podcast is the default URL, and in the post-production of that Reels, there's a logo saying listen to the podcast, you're using the content that you got from the podcast to drive to subscriptions for the podcast, and it becomes a viral loop.
All right, here's a question. I'll let you probably not when you get asked a lot. So let's say you had some actual marketing dollars to put behind this. Where'd you put them?
I would put them in the place where the person wants the audience. So for you, there's very two clear things on what I know so far. The debate would be, do you run TikTok ads because they're very underpriced?
Yeah.
For general awareness, or do you run LinkedIn ads for very targeted business purposes? And the answer is probably both.
And so you do what about like, I don't know if people do this, what about like pay X dollars to get someone crazy on my podcast? Is that,
I'm sure people do it.
Yeah.
I haven't really looked under the hood. I'll say something really funny. You would be flabbergasted how many people say yes to the most random podcasts that have no listeners. And you have actually something to bring to the table because when they Google you, they're like, whoa. And if you think about a celebrity, a person, the finance, the private, like these are most of the people that have become successful didn't get there by accident, right? So a Ryan Reynolds team actually seeing that email from you, like be on this podcast, to me is like, you'd be surprised how much that might be in play, given that, the Jin, he's just so entrepreneurial, he just might think it's a good use of his time.
Yeah.
As long as you have the humility to deal with a lot of no's, and even just hearing mowing lawn and blue collar, that tends to tell me that you probably do. Then you're cruising in a game of just asking 35 people, and then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You reach out to the 55 people that you most want, none of them reply. You do it one more time, one of them replies, now they become the name that you email the next 54 back and be like, look, we had Malcolm Gladwell on the show, you know what I mean? And so, I feel paying a guest is probably something that's going on a lot, something I'm completely unaware to giving any advice on, because I don't know.
No, I'm unaware.
But it's probably worth a debate, I just have a funny feeling, if you're talking business world, a lot of people will say yes, even the biggest CEOs in the world. Pop culture, fame world, because of what you do for a living, I still think you get 5% return on reach out, and that will be enough to get the flywheel going. You could do a ton in 60-second TikTok videos. It's called, you can pique interest for them to click the URL in your profile to listen to the 1-hour podcast. Almost all my social content is just a gateway to the longer form content and vice versa. They work together. So to me, the 60-second content is the marketing. It is the amuse bouche, it is the setting up to the longer form. I think a lot of people who have serious content have overly disrespected social because they understood that they couldn't fit it all into that package. Well, no business can fit all of its information into any marketing. The marketing is there for you to go deeper. With the lack of friction in the internet world, it's there for you.
And you think the long form is a podcast?
I think the long form is a very personal self-awareness framework of how one communicates best. Malcolm Gladwell communicates better in the written word than he does in audio and video. For me, I'm incapable of communicating in the written word. My employees know when I send a company-wide email, they're like, our CEO can't spell. Like, why are we here? And so, and so I think look, for me, it is very clear that video is the most powerful medium, and that's been proven. But Howard Stern did just fine on radio, and Rush Limbaugh and many others built their brand in that of sports radio, Mike and the Mad Dog. And then there's the written word, and Harry Potter's profound, and Malcolm Gladwell's profound, and Michael Lewis. And so I think that's a game of one's capability. And then I always tell people also focus on what you like to do. You might be a better writer, but you actually enjoy making videos. You're probably better off doing, well, the answer is always both, but you're better off probably end of the day if you can only pick one to do video, because if you like it, you'll do it.
And then how do you, like, you've got a number, I'm in a similar situation with you. I have a lot of interests that are actually like not creating
scattered
content. Yeah, like I'm building a private equity firm.
Yep.
I'm teaching a class which takes a tremendous amount of time. And then how do you think about those priorities versus like the content that you're creating? And I know
I believe every human being has an hour that they don't think they have.
So is that really what it takes, an hour, do you think?
Yeah, it all depends on the emphasis. You know, luckily, given that you're in the private equity business, you may have the resources to, you know, for a lot of people watching, they may not have the financial resources to make it an hour. When I used to do all the editing and all the, you know, it didn't take, by the way, all my editing was record, stop, post. I became an improv, no editing, no lighting, no audio maker with Wine Library TV because I didn't have the capabilities or the money to hire someone to do it. Right. I did that for 7 years. People forget that part. They only see the end. They don't see that journey, which is, so for you, yeah, which is why it's so great to host a show, because you're in the business of getting the content and bouncing off of it out of the person that's with you. So it's not like teaching a class where there's prep.
What do you mean by that? What
I mean by that is if you're interviewing a private equity executive or schooling executive or some other interests you have, surfing, wine, baseball, whatever it is, you're just, you know, Scott Boras shows up and you're like, Scott, how'd you start your career? Right. As long as you have the capability to react to the words that they're answering, you have a very meaningful podcast.
Right.
Obviously, I'm very off the charts improv, clearly, which is why a lot of them have top 100 podcasts. There are people who do real prep work to ask the best question. When I did How You Built This, I was like, Jesus Christ, he knows more about me than I know about me. So clearly there are different versions, but in the spirit of being busy, if you're able to get interesting people and you feel comfortable in having conversations, and I already know that about you in the limited interactions we have, I think you're structured to not have to put in a lot of prep time, just the 7 to 10 basic questions, if you're able to bounce off of what they say, should lead to a very interesting podcast. 25-year-olds to 35-year-olds to run a business is like one of the biggest groups in the world right now. Most people out there think of it actually as VC, Mark Zuckerberg, right? Like kids that raise capital. I would argue that that's the smallest sector. The far bigger sector is family business takeover, and then you have another small sector similar to VC-backed, which I think is private equity DNA, where the person goes into it knowing that they want a couple of chapters, maybe 1, 2, or 3 bites at the apple of being operators at some point in their lives. And then that content over-indexes for former operators in their 50s and 60s who've joined private equity with a 50% thinking that I might have to do one more at bat and go take over and run something when the operator can't do it after we make the investment. And those themes for that 60-year-old may not be the same for that 27-year-old, but there's probably a 50% crossover of content which creates audience and interest in the subject matter.
Yeah, I love that.
Like, for example, it's back to playing chess or counterpunching or mixed martial arts. It's really chess. I was creating content. I didn't know that I was gonna go down parenting themes. It was a reaction to who was resonating with my content, which was parents trying to understand why their kids were resonating with my content, initially thinking they didn't like me because of the cursing or the energy, and then finding themselves, overvaluing me. I mean, my inbox now has, in the last 7 years, has gone from parents being mad at me and saying, stop cursing, stop telling my kid not to go to college, to in the last 24 months, you're the only person my kid's listening to. You're actually pushing the agenda I want them to. Please keep doing it. Don't ever stop.
Nice.
And I think for every content.
Well, your content's changed a little bit too.
Well, it evolved. Yeah. It changed because I was listening to the emails. I was like, wait a minute, and some of it was doubling down. When the parents were pushing, I'm like, you're pushing for the wrong thing. It's very real, and you'll feel this as you start to grow. Direct message number 1. Hey, Gary, like, you're a real menace. Like, stop doing this. You're like telling my kid not to go to college. Who the fuck do you think you are? Next DM. Hey, Gary, I'm in deep depression. I'm now on a lot of medication and starting to use alcohol and drugs because my parents are making me go to Yale and I want to be an artist. You start reading that over and over and over again, you become more invigorated to say, fuck you. You want to help these kids. Because then and by the way, I just painted you I didn't paint you the full diamond. Then the 9th message is, Gary, I have a problem. My kid is in big trouble. They hate me. And I think some of the stuff you're talking about might be why. I overpushed them to be an engineer. Now they won't speak to me. Like, what do I do? So all of a sudden you're sitting in this place where you have gift of gab or communication skills. And by the way, I felt this 10 years ago when my audience was so small, nobody knew who the fuck I was. It doesn't take much to feel compelled when you're reading this stuff.
Yeah.